Hey everyone, I'm Josh, and welcome to the Star Wars Canon podcast. We are going to be discussing every week a piece of Star Wars canon, new Star Wars canon, following the purchase of Disney. And this week we're going to be discussing Chapter 15 of The Mandalorian, entitled The Believer. Scott and Dan, why don't you guys introduce yourselves?
Hey everyone, my name's Dan.
Hey, I'm Scott.
So guys, let's hear some initial spoiler-free reactions for this episode. Directed by Rick Famuyiwa. That's the pronunciation of his name. I wrote it down on my pad here, so I would pronounce it correctly. What do you guys think of this episode?
I personally really liked it. I mean, I think it was a lot of fun. The last couple weeks have been big epic, but this was a little more insular, but still super entertaining. And I think it was probably the best character development episode to date. So I'm pretty excited about it.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it as well. The last few episodes were so good in terms of just Mandalorian episodes overall, that I kind of expected this one to maybe take a dip. And the fact that it was Rick directing again, and it was another Mayfield episode, and we knew that Mayfield was in prison of some sort, that I kind of wondered if it would just be a play on that and kind of do a juxtaposition of another sort of prison break, but just with the idea that instead of, Mayfield breaking someone out of prison, it was breaking Mayfield out. And the fact that we got something different than that, and that there was not only a unique take on the way Mayfield was introduced, but I feel like we got a ton of world building in this episode, almost more than most other episodes. So that was a nice surprise, and felt like it was something that, especially coming off the heels of a lot of Disney announcements of other shows that are going to be in this era, it felt like it was nice timing to be able to see a lot more beyond just sort of the scope of Mandalorian, which was really cool.
Yeah, I would agree with everything you guys said. I think that the one consistent feeling I've had across this whole season is that they have done an amazing job week over week of keeping us on our toes. I've rarely felt with any of the episodes that I expected what we were getting. I think with this episode, I came in thinking we'd get a lot of, the setup for the finale, which obviously we did. But if you compare this to the penultimate episode of last season, that episode we had Grogu in the hands of the Imperials, and Nick Nolte's Ugnaught character dead, and we just had a lot happening that was pretty big story-wise, whereas this one, it felt like there wasn't a ton necessarily to move the plot along, but we got so much of that world building, so much of that contextual stuff that really told us a lot about the state of the galaxy. What's the New Republic doing? What is this Imperial remnant doing? I almost felt like we got more details in this episode than we did from the sequel trilogy, honestly, in terms of the political setup in the post Return of the Jedi world. I was super excited going into this week because Rick's episodes from season one, the second and sixth episode, I think were by far my favorite episodes of the first season. So seeing him come back and writing and directing this episode was super exciting. And I think overall, it just had a lot of great stuff, all of which was very unexpected. And I'll say this, I know we're going to do predictions later, but I don't even know if I'm going to try to predict where we're going next week, because I really don't have any clue where they're going to take this. I feel like every time I try to predict, I end up getting surprised by what they end up doing. They're just subverting their expectations in a really good way.
Yeah, I feel like some of the stuff that I would have predicted an episode or two ago for where the season would end up at, or even where next season might pick up at, have already happened. So I really don't know. Yeah, what we'll get to the predictions later, like you were saying, but I really don't know where it's going to go. They're just guesses at this point.
Well, I think like that gives us a good setup point to jump into the spoiler side, guys. So
Yeah.
just as like a pause if you've not seen the episode yet, but if you have, jump in and let's hear from Scott. Like, what's your feelings from a more spoiler reaction on The Believer?
So from a more spoiler side, I think that just going into the world building as a whole, I think that was probably some of my favorite sort of elements that we got out of that. The fact that we saw like that we're kind of assuming that it's always the Empire is kind of doing the evil things, but we saw like a New Republic work camp that Mayfield was being held in, and it was very similar to kind of some of the work camps and other job sites that we saw in like Fallen Order and things like that with Cal Kestis. And then with Mayfield, I think his character arc in the episode 1 was just really great. But I think you got this really interesting position from him of having been in the Empire and not having a lot of respect for the Empire for stuff that comes up later in the episode that becomes clear, but also like respecting and understanding the position of just like a general like Imperial grunt, and like, you know, the fact that like they have to go out there and do this stuff that they don't like or maybe don't agree with. But I think that stuff, and then seeing the fact that like the Empire is with all this like contingency stuff, which we got a little bit of Operation Cinder and stuff pulled in from Battlefront, which I think Battlefront 2 wasn't like the best execution of telling the story, but it had a really cool story within it. So seeing some of that stuff and the fact that like the Empire is totally holding on to like what they can. They have, a mess area that's, meant for like just not the grunts and stuff. It's meant for, captains and things like that within there. So I think there was a lot of really cool just world building stuff that showed both sides of the New Republic and the sort of remnants of the Empire, and made a really good impact on sort of what that's going to see when we get, the new Age of the Republic show, and then Rangers of the Republic show, and then Ahsoka. That these are the things that we're probably going to see as those shows start to grow and fill in this sort of time period in this universe.
Right. Josh, what did you think?
Yeah, I thought for an episode that was only a little over 30 minutes, I felt like we got a lot of different set pieces that were pretty exciting and also very different. I mean, of course, the episode begins with us, going back to recruit Mayfield from this like prison scrapyard, and then immediately we're kind of jumped into the mission, which they're trying to get access to this Imperial terminal to get the coordinates on Moff Gideon, which, given Mayfield having his background as an Imperial sharpshooter, he kind of knows how to go about infiltrating this facility and getting that data. I thought it was a really interesting and cool choice to not just kind of immediately jump to them trying to break into the facility, but rather have this extended sequence where they're transporting this highly explosive material, which I'm a little confused why they just didn't use coaxium, right? They already have this really explosive material in the Star Wars universe, but I guess, that's cool. We're expanding the mythos, but I thought the choice to have that kind of lead up to them actually infiltrating the base was pretty cool. And there were definitely, for me, shades of Mad Max Fury Road in that, Indiana Jones. And then the coolest thing is I thought it really was a nice callback to Rick's season 1 episode 2 on the Sandcrawler. I felt like that was a good kind of callback to all that. And then, once they're in the base, you have this very kind of almost, spy-esque kind of scenario where they have to infiltrate. And I've been saying this to you guys for weeks, but would love to see the payoff of, I think, all the heavy lifting that's been done over the season regarding Din and how he's meeting these other Mandalorians and kind of getting a sense for what it means to be a Mandalorian beyond his narrow definition. And then ultimately, removing the helmet again, and us seeing our longest scene with him without a helmet, which was honestly, it was delightful to watch. Like, he is a great actor, and to be able to see his face, I felt like was such a treat for this episode, even though he really didn't say a lot in that scene, which kind of almost added to it, because he did all the emoting through his face and through his eyes, and kind of, you could tell, when Mayfield starts going off the rails a little bit during that conversation with the Imperial officer, how Din's like, what are you doing? Like, calm down. I thought that was all so well done. And again, such a payoff. And I hope that, this is eventually leading to Din taking helmet off more often, and just kind of expanding his own definition of what it means to be a Mandalorian.
Totally. I think with some of those points you're making a little bit ago on it, I think first thing I wanted to say was that element, or rhydonium, or whatever the material, I just watched the Rebels episode the other night where it's in that. So they have had it, and Sabine and Hera used it as like a way to like explode a group and keep them away from them.
Oh, that's cool.
If I hadn't watched that episode just the other night, though, like, I was thinking the same thing. I'm like, why aren't they using coaxium? Like, it's so obvious right now to pick that up. But that whole setting of them running down through there, it felt like Rambo to me. Like, it just had that like look with this, like, I don't know, palm trees and things like that, but explosions happening in the background.
Yep.
I really liked the setting and the setup for that. Mayfield for me was like the big surprise, because to be honest, last season, I think the two people I liked the least were Toro, who I'm glad he's gone, and Mayfield. Probably I just didn't really like get his character, but this was like a complete change for him. I mean, a real character arc, real development. The scene with him with the Imperial officer, it was amazing. Like, I think it was one of the best acted scenes they've had on the show so far. Just like so much back and forth in their face leading up to this, just boom, snap like that. But if I had to call like a single moment, as a huge Boba Fett fan, the seismic charges. Like, the seismic charge, when they turned to the cockpit, I said to my wife, I'm like, he's gonna push the seismic charge button. Like, I just knew it was coming, and it was just beautiful. I mean, they did a great job with it visually.
Yeah, I think you're spot on with the Bill Burr point. I think he was fine in last season's episode, but definitely could tell he's not, a super trained actor. But I think in that scene with Valen Hess, the Imperial officer, he did some great work. Like, his eyes, just looking at his eyes, you could tell.
Rose swelling. He had like a vein like going in his head. Like,
it was pretty cool to see him, step into that character, and I really hope that that they bring him back. It'd be great to, I think, see him be a recurring character on the show. I think he's pretty interesting. He also brings, the comedic relief that we're not, I think, seeing a ton in the show. So it'd be nice to have him, add that a bit. One of the thing I was going to say is my highlight for the episode. I think, again, it's going back to the Din scene with him taking the helmet off. I think that was a great payoff. I was wondering, and we can hit this later, but the plot point of needing the terminal to scan your face seemed a little bit odd to me, just because, I mean, you would think you'd have to have some kind of security clearance based on your face, which obviously Din wouldn't have, but that's a minor plot hole. And I think also going back to Bill Burr's character, I think a lot of the dialogue that he was given, talking about ideologies and beliefs and kind of, how rules change, based on the situation. I think that was really interesting thematically, how it ties to Din's journey this season, and again, expanding what it means to be a Mandalorian. But I also thought it was pretty cool in that it ties back to a lot of the ideas that I think Rian Johnson was trying to convey in Last Jedi, with like, adherence to a doctrine is dangerous. Like, you have to be a little bit flexible to survive. And I think that was a good kind of, for me, a tie into the larger themes in the saga.
Yeah, and I think that stuff's interesting from the perspective of someone that's not a Jedi. Like the Jedi, and they're dealing with the Jedi and the Sith and the Council, so it is very black and white. Whereas like from just a regular person, especially someone that was serving under the Empire, to see them like have that perspective, I think was really interesting, and another piece that sort of just builds upon the world that they're setting up in Mando. But I agree with the Bill Burr comments that you guys have, and that my takeaway from it was that once you got to that scene with the Imperial officer, you had Bill Burr playing Mayfield, who was playing Bill Burr, and then Bill Burr finally actually became a character in that scene, where it wasn't just watching Bill Burr in a Star Wars setting. So I thought, one, props to the writing that they put around that, and like that they inserted that scene and concept into it, but then also easily not that Bill Burr's been in a lot of things outside of straight comedy roles, but definitely the strongest acting I've seen out of him.
And also props to the music in that scene and the whole episode, frankly. But like the music really built tension from the moment Din's at the terminal forward. It was so like intense. And I just, you felt like something was going to burst the entire time until that gunshot comes out.
Yeah, I thought the music overall was incredible. I think that the sort of juggernaut chase, I don't know if you guys had noticed it, but they had the Mando theme like behind the main like sort of score that was going for that, but it was the regular Mando theme, but it was like double speed. So it was like it was really cool to see it coming in like in this faster pace, like different take on the traditional Mando theme. And they used a lot of the same like instruments that they use for the Mando theme to create that chase song, and it was just a really clever way to sort of build the excitement in that moment.
And how about the like musical heroism when the like TIE fighters saved them and you're like being cheered by the Empire? Like we've never seen the other half of war in Star Wars. Like
that was a pretty cool scene that I think again like was a payoff to the whole Bill Burr dialogue of like, hey, the rules shift based on the situation, and like it's all about surviving. It's like, well, in this scenario, like the Imperials helping them is good. Like even though they are, obviously against the Imperials. One thing I caught that was pretty cool right before the TIE fighters came in and took out the pirates. You have this moment where Din's like clearly exhausted after taking on wave after wave of these pirates, and he's just like, all right, like I'm gonna try my best. And for me, it felt very similar to again Rick's episode in season 1 when Din is about to face off in the final showdown with the Mudhorn, and he's like, this is it, like I have my vibro knife, I'm probably not going to make it out of this. And in that scene Grogu saves him, right? And we're like, oh, okay, that makes sense. And now we kind of like played with an interesting expectation we have by, instead of a good guy saving him, we had the Imperials come in and save him, which I thought was a good callback to that Rick episode.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think even Bill Burr has a line of like, you probably never expect to be like thankful that for TIE fighters or something like that,
Yeah. Never. I think he said like never thought you'd be happy to see stormtroopers.
Yeah, something like that.
That was pretty cool in general. Just seeing like them coming into the base and seeing all the Imperials like cheering them on and like slapping them on the back, and like we've never really seen that side of the Imperials. To me, it was like it reminded me of that scene in Clerks where they're talking about just like, the normal guys who are building the Death Star.
Yeah.
Like it just gave you this very human perspective on the Imperials, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, I really like that sequence because it showed you kind of the state of the Empire in like a very like nonverbal way, and that they were in these like grayish transport stormtrooper outfits or like, uniforms. And then you had regular just white and black stormtroopers that were like there cheering them on and saluting them as they came in. And then they had some like the tan, like Scarif ones in there. Like they had this like hodgepodge of different stormtroopers that you normally don't see like those interjecting. It's normally like on Scarif, they're all wearing like the Scarif ones, and whatnot. So it's really interesting to see that in the sense of like, yeah, the Empire really is rebuilding with what's left. And they're all in this secret base, and it's not that they're all like super coordinated and they're all in pristine uniforms, but it's like who's left and who is here. and they are like bound together still. They're like saluting the one group that made it in. And it really does humanize that, like a stormtrooper on a unique level with like no dialogue. It's just them walking in and being cheered on.
Yeah, this whole season, I feel like, to your point, Josh, from earlier about the sequel trilogy, like it's done so much more to set up what is going on in the galaxy, and like this stuff where we've had these kind of like beat cop X-wing pilots showing up shows you kind of what the Republic's up to. The fact that we've seen the same ones more than once also suggests there's probably not a lot of them out there in the Outer Rim. And then you're seeing these remnants of stormtroopers, like you're saying, Scott, forming on the Empire. It's like the world is in like its greatest state of chaos, and I think that's where Gideon kind of is trying to find his hole, basically, and maybe Thrawn ultimately. But I think that's the path and opportunity for the Empire to rise.
I want to add just one more thing I really liked about the episode that I think a lot of people might have missed, but it was, I think, such a smart line of dialogue when they're going around and kind of talking about, who's going to join Mayfield in infiltrating the base. And, he's like, I don't want Cara Dune. Fennec's not going to work. And then Boba says, let's just say they might recognize my face. And I just thought that was such like a throwaway line, but like when you think about it, it's like, oh my gosh, that's so clever that he's, a clone of Jango, who obviously, was the father of this whole clone army.
Yeah.
And it just, for me, it was so delightful to hear that line, because you're like, oh yeah, like that makes sense, but there's so much implication in that, right? So much like heaviness of concept there. So that was pretty cool.
I mean, John and Dave have done that with the writing, like this whole season of just a single line somehow ties the prequels back to the originals, back to this. Like that's what's making, I think, people so excited about all of it.
Yeah. I think I was just going to say that I think that it really is true that the way they're able to do with so much with so little, and that in the previous episode, you had like the introduction of like why Fennec's there and who saved her with the single line of like, I survived thanks to Boba Fett. And in one line you established that like, one, she's still alive, and two, Boba Fett, that like this is not Rex or another trooper, that this is in fact Boba Fett. And that could have been set up of like a flashback sequence or any number of things that were drawn out, and they used like a single line to establish two characters and why they're there.
Yep.
Let's talk about
that. Really quickly, I want to say one more point. So I love your point, Dan, of like how all the creators on the show have made a really strong effort to like tie in various pieces of kind of Star Wars lore. And I thought it was really cool to use them using the Juggernaut vehicle. That definitely reminded me of the Republic Juggernaut that we see in Clone Wars in Episode 3. And then also, I don't think it's Republic Juggernaut, but it's a similar vehicle that we see in Rogue One, where they rescue Jyn from. So it's just like a good tie-in in a visual way that, it makes everything feel consistent and like it exists in the same universe.
Definitely. And I mean, I think they did that with the armor a bit too. Like those guys are wearing those tank trooper armor, which I think we saw first in Rogue One, but it was like this like blacked olive drabbed version that just again showed that remnant old time kind of thing going on. And also their setting in this like jungle environment where it fit. I felt like it was the perfect place to use a ship that had wheels, which is far and few between in Star Wars. It was pretty cool just to see that.
The armor too this season, like they did last episode, they did it this season, but you're seeing how easily breakable it is. And I think that's kind of a cool little detail that like shows you the Empire's probably cheap and doesn't spend a lot of money on armor, and it's so easily broken all the time.
I thought it was cool with Din fighting with that, because Din this season has kind of been a human shield in most episodes.
He has been,
he's got a little bit of flack for that, I think. But he tried to kind of block with his like arm, and it just broke the armor. And he's like, "Oh crap, this isn't Beskar. Like I have to actually fight right now."
Yeah, I love that detail, because you have seen a few times this season where the Stormtrooper armor just gets shattered. Whether it's by Boba or anyone else. and that immediately his first instinct is to put his arm up and use what would normally be Beskar to block an attack, and it shatters it. And that's like why he's like winded by the end of that fight, compared to some of the other fights he's been in, is because he immediately got himself beat up because his armor was just breaking away instead of deflecting things like the Beskar would.
Yep.
Which I think also enforces the idea of how strong Beskar is and just overall, because I assume we're going to see some, Beskar Darksaber stuff potentially down the line.
Yep.
I mean, I think also talking about the Beskar, going back to Boba, it was awesome seeing that he painted up his armor this week. I mean, he's got some sort of paint by numbers on Slave One, I guess, where he filled back in the blanks, but like it had this matte kind of more tactical finish to it. I thought it looked really cool. And he brought back, of course, his E33, his E33 rifle, which was just so cool looking to see back in the background with him.
Yeah, I thought the paint was interesting in that we're assuming like this was a high priority to get Mayfield and go track down Grogu, so it's probably not that much time that Boba would have had with his armor, and that it definitely was like imperfect, but it gave the sense that like that was a priority to him, like respecting the armor and getting it into some sort of respectable shape, no matter like whether it being perfect or not, so that like in this short window between the end of last episode and now, he still took the time and effort to do that and sort of respects, what that armor means to him.
I think respect's a cool word for that too, because I do feel like they've steadily been establishing Mandalorians as more of samurai, which has always been more of Jedi for the background, but a samurai would go into battle and they would fix that afterwards. Like it's important, like it's honoring the legacy of your family. And so by showing that like chain code last week of the family line, like it was important, like to fix this and make it right. So, but it was imperfect for sure.
Yeah. But I liked that. It felt like that's what would be the case of like, what do I have on hand to get this without slowing down like the group type thing.
Yeah. I like too how the costume has evolved from like last week. Like he's still incorporating, they didn't entirely revert back to like what we saw in Return of the Jedi or Empire Strikes Back. They're making it kind of this new thing that reflects, the period that he spent following getting out of the Sarlacc to whenever we meet him in Mandalorian, that he's wearing that like that desert cloak under the armor. So I like the fusion there.
Me too. I also think it pops with the black instead of the gray. Like it's visually really cool looking.
Yeah.
Also, how cool was Slave One? Like, like I feel like since being a kid playing with the toy Slave One, you're like, how did the people end up in the right spot when you tip this thing? And like the gyroscopes.
That was one of the coolest details I thought, was just seeing finally the interior of Slave One and how that all works. I will say one of the things I thought they could have done better in the episode is, we had Cara Dune joining them in the mission. I thought that they could have probably had Fennec and Boba be the ones kind of carrying out the sniping and doing all that stuff. And it kind of left Cara Dune kind of entirely out of the episode. I thought it would have been cool to see more Fennec and Boba teamed up. And just also, I would love to see more Boba in the episode. Like he was there and he was doing stuff, but I think he could have been more utilized, and hopefully we'll see him in more action next episode.
Yeah, I feel like, you had Cara Dune, who's typically been like hand-to-hand brute force stuff, been utilized in that sense, to have her be doing the same exact thing as what Fennec was doing. Yeah, felt definitely a little redundant, especially since we could have just seen her be like assisting and getting Mayfield. It would have given her some screen time, but for this like infiltration, you could have done it with one person less, and you didn't need necessarily two snipers doing the same thing.
Right.
Yeah, I think generally it was because of the plot need around Mayfield was why she's there. But I agree, like I feel like they underutilized Boba in this episode, which maybe makes me a little excited for next week's. Like just feels like you're not going to continue to underutilize him, right? So
yeah,
there's a lot of room for him to have some epic battle with some dark troopers.
I feel like that's why Cara Dune was there, is because they needed to give a reason why she's going to be in the next episode. That they wouldn't have like dropped her off and then gone picked her back up. That I assume she'll be a part of this like raid to get Grogu back. And so everyone that, you know, is going to be a part of that, that is a part of this main group, needed to be in this episode to just go from A to B, basically.
I was just thinking through too that them doing the sniper shots as they're walking across the ledge, and that probably was one of my favorite kills of the episode. Is Din just kicks this dude who's like peering out the window, just kicks him, and then just reaches the gun under and shoots him through there. I'm like,
yeah,
that was hilarious.
Yeah, they had some fun shooting stuff there, and then earlier, one thing I like too that you don't see is that on the when he's on top of the Juggernaut, that he like ran out of ammo. Like you never like a lot of the times you just see them just shooting infinitely. They'll put up these turbo blasters and just unleash. The fact that he like ran out, you know, or in the games you would like overheat or something like that. But the fact that he like hit a point where he couldn't shoot anymore and just had to throw it, I thought was something interesting. And another one of these things where it was like a throwaway moment, but it builds on the world. Of like, okay, there are these types of weapons in this universe, you know.
A throwaway moment.
Yeah, throwaway moment.
Literally. I think too, this is something, Scott, you and I have talked about a bunch, but like the show plays a lot like a video game. And so like that would be just one more video game scene where it's like you ran out of this weapon, you have to get something else. So you pick up a spear, I think is what he grabbed at that point.
Yeah.
To throw back. So it's definitely cool to tie more of that stuff you see from like Fallen Order or Battlefront back into it.
Mm-hmm.
I know we hit on this briefly, but the actor who plays Valen Hess, Richard Brake, who's like Night King in Game of Thrones, and then best from like a lot of the Rob Zombie films that he's been in. But
he's Joe Chill in Batman Begins.
Joe Chill in Batman Begins.
Oh wow, I didn't realize that.
Yeah, that's who I recognized him from. Yeah.
Yeah, he's. I mean, first of all, you couldn't ask for like a better villain face. Like he has the best villain face in the business.
Mm-hmm.
I thought he was fantastic. The only problem I had is that they killed him off. I would have loved to see him show back up because he's such a good baddie and he's so just interesting.
Yeah.
That's been my problem with the seasons. We're getting spoiled with really good actors in these one-off parts. I'd like to see more folks return because they're really solid.
Yeah, he really sold like the lack of empathy and sympathy for like the loss of life during Operation Cinder. And like you could tell Bill Burr is just like fuming, trying to like hold back as he's bringing it up to him. And this guy's almost like excited by remembering like all they did, even though it was like so many people died during this on both sides.
Yeah.
Just like, you know, what an achievement to him, you know?
Yeah. It's wild to think too with like timeline, like Operation Cinder could have been what, like 2-3 years ago for them? I mean, like if this is 5 years post Jedi, 6 maybe now, did they do that immediately after Return of the Jedi, or did they do it after the Battle of Jakku, which was like a year later, I think?
I think it was before Battle of Jakku. Because I think Battle of Jakku was kind of the final stand of the Imperial forces. So I want to say Cinder might have been pretty shortly after Battle of Endor, potentially. Like not that much time has passed.
Yeah,
So
I think Jakku was almost like the culmination of Operation Cinder. Like it kind of all eventually led up to that.
Okay, got it. Still though, from a time perspective for these characters, it's recent. Like especially for Mayfield, like I feel like that's why it probably boils to the surface a little bit more quickly. Like it's a pretty recent development and he's probably still working through it, you know?
Yeah, and if he was in the Empire and like that was the last thing he was a part of is like this horrific thing, like they lost and he still, you know, was a part of that definitely, you know, makes you pretty jaded towards, you know, what they put you through.
The only other thing I want to mention on that Valen Hess character is I think the dialogue he had with like freedom versus order and like why people give up their freedoms was again a very good like tie into the overarching themes of the saga. Like that was a perfect explanation for why Palpatine was able to rise to power, right?
Mhm.
So I think it just, again, the episode did so much heavy lifting on like, let's establish what's going on with the universe, but also like the underlying themes of Star Wars in a way that you wouldn't really expect a 30-minute episode to do. It's kind of incredible.
Yep.
Yeah, and I mean, I think obviously using the word order was extremely intentional
Yeah.
too, and just adds a lot more to the idea of the First Order for me. I mean, it makes it more interesting when you see this early beginnings of what it could be.
What did you guys think the title of the chapter, The Believer, what do you think that refers to?
So it's interesting. Like, I think it could be Din or it could be Mayfield, honestly, because I think it's a little bit about his belief, like Mayfield's belief in the Empire and what's happening there and belief in general. Like, he talks through that a bunch, but I think the probably more on the nose direct thing it's about is Din, his kind of orthodox style of, the Children of the Watch and what that's evolved into.
Yeah, I think I think it kind of could be applied to a lot of the characters within this. I think, yeah, the obvious ones are what you said, Dan, with Din and Mayfield, but I even think that with Joe Chill himself, that he had a line that I took a note of that he said to them that referred to the Empire, they're going to welcome us back with open arms. Like, that he still has all this huge belief in the Empire and what they're doing is good, and that the world needs them and wants them. So I think there's a lot of sort of elements that when you look from like a plot perspective, it's literally like, get in, get this key, get out. That's all that happens. But they show you all these viewpoints of all these different people in the galaxy, in the midst of that it's another one where, yeah, it's who's that title apply to? Is it meant to apply to all of them? Did they write this with a specific one in mind? I don't know that I would be able to pinpoint on a single one.
That's interesting. I hadn't thought about the Imperial officer as being also, the diehard believer in the Imperial cause. But yeah, I think they're all believers in their own way. Like even Mayfield, he's a believer maybe in himself. He's kind of the Han Solo character of like, it's a hokey religion you're believing in, and I just rely on myself, my own wits. But yeah, I think overall, from what we're all saying, this episode might have been the deepest of the season so far in terms of like the thematic work that it was doing. Pretty impressive.
Yeah.
Another example of one where they could have just made this pure filler and it was not in any way. Like it is a side quest, sort of like we have to go find this, coordinates to get to Gideon, but like it had so much building of the world, the characters. Like I think they really delivered on it.
Yeah, my assumption was it was going to be like a Monster of the Week-esque episode that was just, we got to get Mayfield and what's the adventure going to be around that. And I feel like it still had adventure with like the Juggernaut chase and like the, sniping escape sequence. But throughout it, they just loaded it with so many details that are like, almost impossible to go through after a single viewing or a second viewing and pick up on everything that they were sneaking in there. Even one that, so I watched it when I watched it a second time, that they pick up was just like a joke Easter egg of like Bill Burr says, like, let's go fill out these TPS reports, like when they're trying to escape them. And that's like a joke from Office Space. The like TPS reports are the things that they make him come in on the weekend to do. So it just sounds like it fits, like it'd be something they'd have to do, but it was just like literally an Office Space, like Easter egg that they snuck in there.
Speaking of funny little Easter eggs, what did you guys think of Brown Eyes? I thought that was pretty hilarious. Like that was the best they could come up with on their feet was Brown Eyes.
Yeah.
And that the officer bought it was a little funny too.
Right.
Yeah. Well, I liked that he like it was. I think it was clever, and I liked what you're saying, Josh. That like he finally gets his helmet off, and then he doesn't speak, and they like made a bit that like, oh yeah, he was involved in this thing that we did, and so his hearing's all jacked up, and so they're all like speaking loud. But it did really give like Pedro a chance to have to like use his face. We hear his voice, but we don't see his face. But this gave him a chance to like use his face to like emote in an interesting way, which was pretty clever and a fun way to do it. I do wonder why he has a mustache when he's always wearing the helmet. That was one thing immediately. I was like, oh, he's got a mustache, but he's got a helmet on. Why is he grooming? But
He looks a little haphazard though.
yeah,
I was saying that to Katie about like, well, how'd they cut his hair? Like, is he doing that himself? Like, just using the flamethrower across?
Yeah. But they got to make him look cool at least when he gets the helmet off, I guess.
Yeah, I felt like his acting though with his face, like you were saying in that scene, it was sort of a Mexican standoff with word. And like just watch him just a couple little like eye movements to the side like that was like so much out of him. You know, like it was so much more than we've seen the entire time from him in the show.
Right.
Been, you know, bloody in the face once last season. That's it.
Yep. I was just gonna say to your point, Scott, about like making him look cool. I thought that scene was really cool because after he takes off his helmet, he's almost like a bit of like a deer in the headlights. Like he doesn't know how to like effectively get the officer off their trail, and Mayfield has to come in and like save him. So it's an interesting thing to see our hero kind of be incapable of something. Like he needs help, but he's kind of like odd or awkward in that situation. I thought that was pretty interesting character.
Yeah, and I wonder if some of it too is like the weight of like what he just did has kind of like stunned him a little bit, you know, like they made such a big deal about the helmet, and he not only does he do that, then he's talking to this guy, then Mayfield comes in and he's like, I got to get out of here, and how do I get my helmet back on? Like, not that he's like, you know, necessarily phased by a lot of things, but it definitely would be like a, you know, your mind would be racing in multiple ways of like, okay, like how do I talk to Mayfield after this? It'd be like, you've never seen my face.
Well, that was a sweet little, I think, end to that scene where Mayfield goes, "You did what you had to do. I didn't even see your face," and he hands it back the helmet. And he looks away, and I was like, "What a cool little character moment!" Because literally the whole episode up until that point, Mayfield's busting his chops for wearing the helmet, and then he's like, "I get it. That was a big deal for you. Like, don't worry about it." That was pretty.
Yeah, I like that a lot.
They went through something together there, like, you know, with him with shooting the officer and him with the helmet. Like it was like to them, it was equal. You know, like it was on equal playing field of difficulty for their life. And you know, for me, I just feel like I want to see more of Mayfield now. Like it just it made me really want to see more of his character.
Yeah, that scene with the officer I thought was really. They just did such a good job of it. As soon as Mayfield starts speaking, you know, Din reads him as what he's like leading to right away, and like the way he reacts, the audience can read that of like, oh, this is not gonna end well for like, you know, the people in this room outside of these two, pretty much.
And Rick's episodes last season were pure action, I feel like. So like this was really cool to see him doing something that was heavy dialogue like that.
Yeah,
I was gonna ask you guys, because I read an interview with Robert Rodriguez, and I guess he was not the first choice of directors for the last episode, chapter 14. I kind of wonder if Rick might have been the first choice for that episode. You know, just given that action-heavy episode, one. Yeah.
I'd heard a rumor that Favreau was going to do both of these, and that something else was up that he was working on that he couldn't do this episode. So he called Rodriguez, because they're close friends, to bring in, but it's so hard to know for sure. But I mean, you could see it make sense.
I wonder, because I think for some reason I thought that at some point that it sounded like Rick was meant to do 2 this season, so maybe it was that he dropped out of that one. I saw other people speculating that it was like meant to have been like Kevin Smith was supposed to do that one that Rodriguez took over, but who knows. I think Kevin Smith, just in the world of this type of stuff, always gets thrust in there as a possibility, and who knows.
That would feel like an odd episode for Kevin to direct.
Yeah,
given the action.
That's like, where I didn't really buy into that too much.
Yeah, like this, I think this would have been a far more, you know, believable episode for Kevin Smith to direct, given like all the great dialogue scenes we got.
Yeah, but yeah, I think that I rewatched that little sequence with the officer at there a lot, because I almost got like Inglourious Bastards vibes, like opening of where it's like you have this dude that's just like into being evil, basically, you know, next to these people that are like, one is like clearly like has like honor, but they're both honorable in some sense, and like one's been burned by that, and you just have these different viewpoints, and they're all colliding on like a very touchy subject, which was really interesting to see, and something you wouldn't have like expected from this episode, after coming off the last few episodes.
For sure. I think the one thing we haven't covered from the episode is the end with Gideon. Like I think they bring him in, and then you get Mando basically word for word quoting the line from last season. And well, part of me is like, why are you giving up your plan? But another part of me is like, that was so cool. Like it was just so cool to watch him like in this sort of power mode against Gideon. Even just the size of the hologram in it was like, he's a big force about to come after you.
Yeah. I was wavering back and forth between whether I liked that moment or whether I didn't like that moment for those reasons. And that I thought it was a really clever way to like lead you into the finale, just from like a here we go moment of like using the spinning his own words against him. But then I think we've seen stuff with like when Boba, first took the Slave One into the atmosphere and was like, oh, the Empire's back, or like they're back or whatever he said last episode, that I don't know that Din knows much more beyond any of the rest of like how big the Empire's like force is right now, and how big Gideon's force is, and how much power he has in the setup, and what his entire plan is to be like telegraphing, hey, we're coming to get you. Seemed like a little bit of a bizarre choice for someone that's like, pretty good at, we just watched an episode of infiltrating and like getting something, and then they announce it to like the person that has the most power in the galaxy or something.
It's a good point.
Yeah, I think I personally thought that was pretty cool. Din using Gideon's words against him. I also just again think it's pretty cool that we have really no idea where we're headed next episode. Maybe this is a good segue into our predictions, but I would say the only thing that I think we'll see, that I'm fairly confident we'll see next week, is some sort of confrontation between Din and Gideon, Darksaber versus the Beskar Spear.
Yeah,
I feel like they have to pay that off, given what we've seen in the last few episodes. It would be, I think, odd to leave that to next season. So I think we will see that. I would be surprised, frankly, if we see them rescue Grogu next episode and kind of, that be the end. It feels like we're probably headed for a cliffhanger that does not end on a happy note. I want to say this season probably ends on more of a down Empire Strikes Back type of ending.
Yeah, I think I feel like we probably will have something like that. My thought is I don't know that we'll see this will be the end of Moff Gideon, and that I feel like we've had him introduced just at the tail end of last season, and that there wasn't really enough of him doing, I guess, like something horrible enough besides trying to get Grogu that would maybe justify wiping out that character right away. I think there is the potential if someone else was to come in his place that's like above him, that's maybe like a known property, that could make sense. But I feel like that would be a little iffy going off of last season. We had the client, like Werner Herzog, like getting blown away by stormtroopers because Gideon was arriving and like coming to just finish the job he clearly hadn't done. So, I mean, you could have like a version of that happening again with someone else coming in. But I feel like Gideon, could either get away with it and still, have Grogu, or, maybe not necessarily die. But I would be surprised if we lose Gideon right away after just a single season where he wasn't so fully like utilized a ton throughout it.
Yeah, I think Gideon makes it out. I think he makes it with the child and Grogu. I'm not really sure what that means for all our heroes though, because I do think I think Bo-Katan, Koska, and Axe are going to show up in some capacity. I kind of don't think Ahsoka. I keep going back and forth on it, but I don't think she'll show up. But if I had to put then death predictions, because it feels like someone should die, it's pretty tough to choose who they could kill off here, both good and bad. I feel like it could end in the good guys are really beaten up and defeated, and the bad guys run away with the baby, and we're kind of left in shambles, sort of like you said, Josh. It's basically Empire Strikes Back. just replace Grogu and Han and put them in opposite positions.
Mm-hmm.
Although a crazy twist could be if Boba was not on the good side, if he's playing them.
Mm-hmm.
And he does roll with Grogu just like Empire Strikes Back.
Yeah, I think that'd be interesting. I know, when we started hearing these rumors that Boba Fett was back, we had discussed kind of them doing a version of the Twin Cannons of Destruction storyline from the Dark Horse comics, and like having this
Mm-hmm.
showdown between Din and Boba. But again, like they're continuing to subvert expectations, and I think it's been really cool to see Boba as like a good guy, or at least
Mm-hmm.
a more great character that is not good or bad. And I think also, going back and looking at the Clone Wars episodes of Boba, like Filoni definitely has this impression of Boba as being a conflicted character. Like he's certainly not bad, and he's even like a little horrified when he sees other bounty hunters do terrible things and kill like innocent people.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we're kind of coming back full circle to that character and saying like, this is a great character, and he's had some trauma in his life. He saw his dad get beheaded in front of him, like but he's not necessarily evil. Something I would like to see still. I know we talked about this a little bit previously, but I think there's a lot of interesting stuff you can do with the Boba Fett character going forward. I mean, certainly if you somehow brought Mace Windu back into the equation, that's like
Mm-hmm.
ripe for a dramatic confrontation there. Particularly like now, like does Boba know Grogu's a Jedi? He's trying to help save a Force sensitive, so like that could complicate it.
Mm-hmm.
Other thing that I'm just wondering about, since we had that Camino symbol on the Doctor's outfit last season, could we somehow go back to Camino? And if so, like seeing Boba Fett return to Camino and having that like weight of, oh my gosh, this is where I like grew up and was with my dad. Like it just could be really interesting kind of dramatic scenes.
Yeah, the Camino stuff is interesting because you could get that in this next episode, because some of those Camino doctors and whatnot are the reason they like snagged Grogu and why Gideon's using them. So he might recognize some of that symbols on, scientists that they're trying to like rescue Grogu from. Assuming Boba goes with them on this next one, which, based on what he had said, that's part of his like honor to fulfill, is to help him, rescue the child.
Well, he's also their Uber. He's their Uber.
Yeah, that's true. We don't have the Razor Crest.
You see Grogu with the Kaminoans, and he's just like, pack your things.
Yeah. But the other thing that makes me think we'll see some more of Boba within this is that I know there was also rumors of a potential Boba like spinoff, and that could have been anywhere in the timeline. That like if they were to kill Boba in this next episode for some reason, like you would know that you're getting more Boba elsewhere. And the fact that we didn't get a show based around that, I assume that means we're probably going to have Boba as a part of this show. Maybe not a main character, but as a recurring character for some time.
Yep.
Yeah, I think something we've talked about a little bit before, but this like I forget who's coined it, the Beskar throne concept that could be out there. It could be how they continue this series into a broader kind of world. It's like, who ultimately takes control of Mandalore? And I mean, Boba potentially has a claim if they, they just canonized Jaster Muriel. If they canonize the rest of that story, Jaster once led Mandalore. So that could be a very interesting path for his character. But then you have Bo-Katan on the other side. If you made Din Force sensitive, he could even be a claim under the like Tar Vizsla kind of storyline. Sabine once held the Darksaber, like who's out there. I mean, there's so many directions they could take that like story right now. And with Gideon holding it, it's like he's Joffrey, like he's this annoying bad guy in the midst of it.
Yeah.
And I don't know where I saw it, but I saw someone who made an observation of like, maybe the title of the show, The Mandalorian, isn't talking about Din, it's talking about the Mandalorian as a people. You know, and it's a show about these various characters who are all Mandalorian, but like, come in different shapes and sizes and backgrounds. And I think that's kind of a cool concept that we could see. The other thing, as I was thinking about it, guys, is like beyond just the Darksaber, Beskar spear, I think having to be paid off, I think we probably also have to see a payoff of whoever Grogu reached out to in the Force, Python, because, again, that would be odd, I think, not to pay that off somehow before the end of the season. And maybe it's not even until like the tail end of the episode, but feels like that would make sense to bring back that plot point.
I think just like last season ended with everything's all wrapped up and perfect, and then there's like the Darksaber bursts through and it's like the bad guys are coming. Yeah. I think it could be the exact reverse on this one. That I mean, even with Empire Strikes Back, it ends on a downer, but then like Lando and Chewie are off on the mission and they're looking out the window at like, kind of that classic Star Wars hopeful feeling.
Right.
So I feel like we could end in kind of terrible, cut to black, and then whoever opens their eyes or references this that we notice. And I'm so curious how they do that. Do they let us know? Is it like you see like a robotic arm and you're like, wait, is that Luke or is that Base? Like, like there's so many things they could throw at us with that Jedi reveal.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that I feel the same, that if I was to guess how it would go down, that's going to be sort of what the season will end with, is kind of this rescue mission won't go as planned and they'll have to flee, and we might see someone die on one side or the other that's more important. But I do feel like you're going to have some sense of whoever this Jedi Master is that's supposed to train Grogu makes an appearance, and maybe it's to Din and he's like like someone's like, where's the child or whatever, or like where's Grogu, like they've come to him assuming that he's got him in hand, and that's where we leave, is that the next season's gonna be this person accompanying Din to try and rescue him successfully, or they they're pinned down in some moment in the final sequence of this battle against Gideon, and this person appears out of nowhere to kind of not necessarily save the day, but shift the battle to their side so that they can escape with Grogu or not. But I think who they bring in to be this is really interesting, because it could be any number of people we've known from the mainline stuff. It could be brought in like Cal Kestis from Fallen Order. They could go to Legends and pull someone like Kyle Katarn. Or what we've seen through this show is like how in such little time Din and Grogu became like just like staples of the Star Wars universe, that they could introduce someone that within a few episodes next season is suddenly a fan favorite. Yep. Like, so they could totally go this other route and break free from existing Star Wars reigns and introduce someone brand new.
Maybe it's just talking about Game of Thrones a little bit, but a thought that I just had was, it could be pretty interesting if they go to rescue Grogu, and like similar to what happened in Game of Thrones when the sister attempted to rescue Theon from Ramsay, and Theon didn't want to go. What if Grogu was like, he's been going slowly dark or whatever, and he's like, no, like he tries to force choke Din or something. Like that could be pretty dramatic, and like, holy crap, like now we have Grogu who's going to the dark side.
That'd be a really dark ending, but pretty cool.
Yeah.
What's your guys over under on seeing Thrawn?
I don't think we will see him.
That's kind of what I think too. I think it's pretty unlikely.
Yeah.
I don't think we'll see Gideon die. That's kind of what I think. Like if Gideon dies, then there's a chance.
You're seeing Thrawn. That's what my thought is. I think you could see him in the same way. I mean, we didn't get a tease of Ahsoka. We got a full-blown episode with Ahsoka this season. But I think you could, in a way to help set that up further, the Ahsoka show, that you could get like a broadcast, that comes to the bridge or something of Gideon talking to Thrawn or something like that, where maybe that's, where we get our first look at like what Thrawn's going to look like, maybe what actor is playing Thrawn or something like that, if they're that far out there. Other than that, I feel like they're going to keep it more focused and not introduce Thrawn yet.
Yeah, I was going to say that I also don't expect to see Thrawn, but hearing your idea, Scott, of just like hologram to Gideon could be a good way to do it, but in a subtle way.
Yeah.
And they could even like be really coy with it and just like shoot it from, the back of the hologram, and you see
Yep.
it talking to it. So we don't even have to necessarily show the actor, just hear the voice.
Yeah, kind of like what they did with Thanos until they like fully had Josh Brolin, where they're you do a bit more with them.
Yeah, but I also was going to say, I think for the same reason I don't think we'll see Thrawn, is we probably won't see like Ezra, or even maybe Ahsoka or Sabine, because they're probably saving those characters for the spinoff that we're getting. But that being said, like, I'm so reluctant to say like what I expect, because every episode I'm so blown away by them doing something totally unexpected. So
I mean,
maybe we'll see the whole crew.
Yeah, if you'd asked me on week 1, what did I expect would happen, I would have said by the end of the season, we might see a cameo of Boba, and maybe Ahsoka shows up to help them at the end. And that happened weeks ago. I think they've been totally subverting expectations in the right way. And Thrawn could show up. I mean, I think you think of Empire Strikes Back and we get the Emperor reveal in a hologram. So it's possible they do it in that same way as Empire and kind of save him for the big bad of the Filoniverse MCU that they're creating with these 3 new series.
Yeah. I think it is really interesting, and that in the same vein of I just don't know what to expect, and that I was saying I don't think they'll kill Gideon because they haven't had a chance for him to do enough stuff, but they've been so respectful of our time with every episode, the amount they're able to cram in this season, that if they what we've seen them do in 25 minutes, they could make him do some horrific stuff, or he could be the one that directly kills off a character or something and justifies a reason, or you hear a plan that's revealed, or that what they've already done to Grogu by the time we catch up to him. There is enough time that they've proven that they could, build up a reason that we need to get rid of Gideon right away, and leave next season with something else that's hanging in the myths, or, some other path for the show to go down.
I think to your point though, Scott, about Gideon, we really haven't seen enough of him, and frankly, I'd be kind of bummed if we got rid of him before really letting him do his thing. I want to see more of him. I think he's such an interesting character. I really was hoping, before the start of this season, that they would make that character an Inquisitor. I think that would be such a cool tie-in to, again, the Filoniverse. The question there would be if he was an Inquisitor, and was Force sensitive, why he wouldn't use his own blood or his own body as a sample for this project. But maybe it's just his M count is not nearly as high as Grogu's.
Yeah.
Well, what if he was an Inquisitor who didn't have the Force? He's a skilled fighter, maybe even has background on Mandalore, potentially because of this Darksaber stuff, and he's used in that way. You maybe still need that function of more of a leader in that group. But that would give a background reason as to why he wants the Force.
Really cool.
A jealousy level of it.
Yeah. We also don't know the history fully of Grogu between Order 66 and now. So he could be Force sensitive in some regard, and Gideon could be Force sensitive in some regard, but they're specifically tracking down Grogu. They have a group of Padawans or younglings or whoever that they kind of hid away outside of Order 66 for the purpose of being able to come harvest them later, and because they've hinted at that other ones didn't work and things like that, and that they need the child again. So we really don't know the history there and what the full scope of all that stuff is. So all of that could be playing into so many different elements of who Gideon is and what his skills or potential powers are and things like that.
That's interesting.
It's going to be a crazy week. I can't believe that we're at the finale already, but I mean, it's so exciting that I just don't have any idea truly of where this is going to head. So I'm looking forward to doing this breakdown next week.
I like my Camino prediction, so I'll stick to that for my prediction for next week's episode. We're going back to Camino.
I think it is very plausible with Boba, and that they've made hints that like Boba's very aware of like who he is and where he comes from in his history, especially like with the line from this week, you know, that they would recognize him. And the fact that we've seen these Camino things come up on these scientists, like it would make sense that if Boba's involved in this, you know, raid to get Grogu, that he could come across some Camino stuff, and that creates some, you know, interesting storylines from that.
Awesome. All right. Well, I think
You
that's
see a little Tamura running around, and he's like, "Oh no, not again!"
Well, they got to get Daniel Logan somewhere.
Yeah, that's true.
Right. Look him up.
All right. Well, I think that that wraps us up for this week. We will join you guys next week for a recap of the season finale, chapter 16 of The Mandalorian. And then I believe after that, we will start working our way back through other episodes, and also most likely be covering the gallery episodes that come out on Disney Plus on a weekly basis. So everyone have a great week, and may the force be with you.
This is the way.
See ya.